I'm Jimmy Ruiz, Dental Business Manager for Rollins DG Shape. Today in Beyond the Margins, I'm joined by a dental pioneer who helped push dentistry forward before digital technology became mainstream. Rob Nazzal is joining us today, and he's helped not only digital industry, but also individuals that in today are in leadership positions. Rob has served in several boards. He was co-founder of Custom Automatic Prosthetics, and today he's co-founder and CEO of iCortica. Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. It's been a long time since we've known each other, so I appreciate the time you take to talk to us today.
Of course, the second I saw your request, I was like, let's do this.
Appreciate it, Rob. Well, I have some questions that I do want to get into, but, before, we talk about all that fun stuff that you've done along the way in the dental lab industry. You didn't just stumble into digital dentistry. From your college years at Cornell University and on, you were already leaning toward technology. How was it back then, and what pulled you into that early on?
I mean, I was actually inspired as early as the age of 6 by technology. It was, I'm going way back.
So Atari and Nintendo?
I wanted an Atari when I was a little kid, and my parents decided to get me a computer instead.
Oh.
It was a Radio Shack, used to have the cutting edge
Yes.
technology. So they got me a computer, and one day I came home from school, and my mom said, "Let me show you something." And the computer, she pulled it up, and it said, "Hi, Rob, it said, "What's your name?" And I typed in Rob, and it said, "Hi, Rob, how are you?" And I swear my mind was blown. I just had never seen anything like this before. And I knew from there, I read everything about it. I was writing code at the age of 6
Oh my God.
in 1981. And I knew what I wanted to do I didn't know you could make money doing it eventually.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if anybody knew what you could do with it, but I knew back then. And so that's why I went to one of the best schools for computer science, and then worked in high tech for many years, and then I eventually stumbled into dental.
Now, that's an amazing journey. I mean, I remember myself, early on loving technology, similar story as yours with, Ataris and Nintendos, and then later on and with computers. So that's very fascinating. And I think that's what kind of got us here too, right? Because that passion for technology and seeing the opportunity in the dental industry, it just seems like a right fit for us.
Absolutely. I mean, what I learned even as a kid, because I was always kind of into the latest technology, and the adults were like asking me, how do I do this? And I learned a lot about the importance of making sure that you can solve a problem with it, but it's also only as good as the ability of someone to use it. It needs to be easy to use, and people need to learn how to use it. And so I wrote a book when I was 12 about how to code, and I did all kinds of consulting when I was a little kid. I was making $20 an hour, but when I was a kid, that was
That's amazing.
that was everything. So it was a passion of mine very early.
That's awesome. That's great. I didn't know that side of it, but I think that's that I can see that transition, because you mentioned that you then stumbled into dentistry. Now you work for a major, you work for an industry scanning company that was long before scanners became mainstream, right? Mm-hmm. Now, tell me about dentistry looked like back then in the early days.
Yeah, so it was actually a very good friend of mine that started a company called Brontis. They had found a scanner at MIT that was bolted to a desk. He was like, I think we can shrink this thing down and put it in someone's mouth and scan teeth with it. I was like, wow, that's amazing. I don't know anything about that stuff. And he was trying to pull me into the company. We'd worked together before, but I didn't feel like it was a fit for me, because I didn't know anything about dental. And when I saw what it could do, I got a chill down my spine. I just thought it was the most incredible thing, and it was the future. And I had to join. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't even know what a dental lab was, but my role was to figure out, how do I help how do you make crowns from this scan? Back then, you ask, what was it like back then? If I sent a file to a dental lab, they would have no idea what to do with it back in 2006. They didn't have a model. They didn't know how to process it. They didn't know how to do margin marking or any of these things on a 3D scan from inside the mouth. So our fit rate when I was first starting, we had a 20% fit rate when we first, we made our first batch of crowns. The fact that anything fit was incredible. But over time, we got things working. But then the job was, how do you teach the labs to handle these things? How do we make it easy for the lab to have a digital workflow? What is a digital workflow in the laboratory? Because they had all been doing, some of them had started on scanning models. Yeah. But what do you do when you don't have the model? Yeah. So we bought a $500,000 printer back then to produce models for our customers, because these little in-house printers were non-existent at the time. Yeah. And we had to dial everything in and make sure everything was accurate. There was a lot to figure out.
That sounds like a big mountain to climb, to have to educate the clinician and then have to educate the laboratory on how to receive it and process that as well.
100%. We had to work both sides of the network, which was complicated. But I had seen a mix in the lab's eyes and the dentist's eyes. Some were enamored with the technology. Mm-hmm. The labs saw the future of where this could go, but also a lot of labs were scared and resistant. It's natural for us to be resistant to change, and so that was a very big part of our journey, was to try to help educate and actually show the benefits of these things. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Jeffrey Moore, who wrote Crossing the Chasm, which, there's this group of innovators and early adopters that embrace technology, but then to cross the chasm over to the mainstream it's the hardest part. And I had studied him a lot, and it was, digital scanning and digital dentistry has crossed the chasm, mm-hmm. but it didn't happen overnight. It took quite a while.
Yeah, and then, you guys did the work, you guys were successful, and then that company ended up getting acquired by a larger company. Now, back then, did you start seeing that shift? Because, like you mentioned, technology moves fast, but our industry in the lab maybe wasn't moving as fast as technology. Tell me about, when that change happened, how did that industry start to shift in your perspective?
When we were acquired?
Yeah.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense for us, because we had a new technology but needed to be able to get to the market, and they also had a solution for laboratory milling at the time. And so it was a good pairing of the data source to the output. And it was a $250,000 zirconia mill. Dang. Yeah, the size of a refrigerator.
Yes.
And but it was the state of the art. It was the state of the art. It was the 3M lava mill, and when you said lava, you meant zirconia. They were interchangeable words like Kleenex at the time. That's right. So it just made a lot of sense with the digital fabrication, the digital scan, to come together like that. But yeah, and I got to go meet all of these labs that were trying to figure out how to digest all this change that was happening at the time. And I knew something special was happening when I saw that, because there was some people embracing it and some people resisting it. And usually when you see that, there's something's going to happen.
And you stayed at the forefront of a lot of that technology. How intentional was that, and how would that differ from, seeing the Patterson taking action? Was that kid, that 6-year-old kid always driving you forward, or was there maybe a combination of seeing Patterson in the industry that made you continue to push forward?
I think that 6-year-old kid is always what drives my actions. I love being on that cutting edge and understanding how can this tool help people? Yeah. How can how can it change things, make things better? And so, I mean, I wish I could say I was like, I do pay attention to patterns, but I'm happy that I have this curiosity because I think it's helped me a lot, and I love teaching people at the same time. I like turning it into something that's actually useful. I think technology for the sake of technology is kind of a waste, and I think technology that solves real problems is really the thing that gets me excited. So I like looking for those opportunities.
Sometimes as the masses, they like FOMO, so they gravitate into something just because it's hot. How do you see the difference between the clinicians and laboratories who adopted technology because it was meaningful to them, and versus those who bought it because they wanted to test it and then just collect the dust? Like, what do you think about those two different types of individuals?
Well, I think the ones that bought it and collected dust, they had good intentions. They just may not have had the education. I always try to find the good intent behind everything. Even the vendor who was selling it probably really believed in their solution, but sometimes it doesn't work because it just doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work because it's too hard to use. Ease of use is one of the most underestimated things in the world, but especially in the clinic for the intraoral scanners and in the lab for fabrication. It's ease of use. You have 1,000 things going on every day. It has to be very easy. So the way I think about that is I think it's sad because the labs want to embrace the technology. When you buy something like that, you want it to work, and when it sits in the corner, that's a failure in terms of the tech and also the education behind it.
And then from there, it seems like you transitioned then to the next stage, which was CAP, and there you and your partners were selling roll-in mills at a time when most dental labs didn't trust milling. You were talking about scanning, and now we're talking about milling, a different learning curve. And so a lot of them didn't understand it yet. What did the market feel at that point, from going from intraoral scanning now to milling?
Well, there's a little more to that story, if I could tell you.
Of course.
So after having visited 400 laboratories as part of 3M and seeing all the different reactions to the technology, I saw a lot of fear and uncertainty about what was happening. And so I had told my eventual business partner, Bob Cohen, in CAP, I said, you should start a milling center and help laboratories in the area because I see a big need for this. And he said, want to help me? And I said, no. and so but I said, I'll help you with the business plan. And after digging into it with him, I decided to join him to build a milling center. And at the time, mills were $250,000.
Yeah.
And then we bought a second mill for $160,000. And then we bought another one for $80,000. And zirconia started gaining traction in terms of not just being a substructure, but a full contour product. And I had made a video of dropping a sledgehammer on a zirconia crown that went, I call it dental viral. I think like 10,000 views or something like that. But in the dental lab world, that's huge.
Yeah.
So at the time, and then one day, Glenn Kennedy calls me and says, I have this mill. I'd love for you to try it. And so we brought it in, and it was the roll-in mill. It was the DW30, and it blew our minds. Wow. It was sitting in the same room next to this $250,000 mill, 5-axis compared to a huge 3-axis mill, and just performed like a charm. And it occurred to me, we had built this milling center business to ease, to basically help labs do zirconia without having to buy a mill, right? Because they couldn't afford to spend that much money on it.
Yeah.
And so we had a growing zirconia milling center business, but at the same time, the mills were going from $250,000, $160,000, $80,000, and now this incredible $30,000 mill.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me, we need to use this, but also this is going to be something that the labs need to use. And we as a milling center can't think of ourselves as a milling center anymore. We have to think of ourselves as a solution provider for our customers. That if you're not ready to embrace zirconia, but you get orders for zirconia, use our milling center.
Yeah.
But when you start to grow your business to the point where you're getting enough, we'll help you transition so that you can do it yourself. And when we changed our mindset about what is our purpose, when we used to think of ourselves as a milling center, the idea of selling mills was almost a crazy idea because we would be cannibalizing our own business. But at the same time, when we thought of it as our customers have graduated to the point where they've embraced this new world,
It's a wonderful
we want to be
perspective.
part of that journey with them. And when we changed that mindset, it turned into, I mean, you know the rest of the story.
Exactly,
It just changed everything for us and the industry.
Yeah, and you guys were very successful and early adopters. What leadership lessons shaped how CAP operated differently from its competitors? Because you guys you guys created a standard.
Well, thank you. It's funny. I didn't really think of it as us actively trying to differentiate ourselves. I had some experiences as a customer, really understanding the importance of support and what happens when you're not supported well with equipment, and how painful that can be when your entire business depends on this machine working or not, and how painful that can be when you want to help your customers and you got to look them in the eye and say, I failed because this machine's not working.
It's a trickle down effect, right?
Big time.
To the dentist, to the patient, ultimately, and
the whole chain is impacted by it. And there was a point when we said we'll never let our customers suffer from that, and if it costs us more, then we'll do whatever we have to. And so I think that was really the point when we said we're trying to solve problems here. We want to make sure that our customers see us as a partner and not just a vendor.
Yeah.
So.
And you talked about the scalability of the laboratory, from having a few zirconia cases that could be outsourced to a milling center to then growing that business and being able to take it in-house. And so back then you were educating on why investing in milling machines made sense before there was mass adoption. What conversations came up early, and what was ROI even a topic back then?
Oh yeah, I mean, ROI was a big topic. The early conversations were mainly about ease of use, and the first crown we made back then, Roland was selling just the mill, and then there was another company selling tools. There was another company selling cam, and the questions were, well, how do all these pieces work together? And we were in a wonderful position because we had a milling center. We figured out all the different pieces that had to work together, and we created a solution around it. So we took one huge question off the table. It's like, how do I figure out how to make this work? And we turned that into, we're going to show you the recipe, and you can take it. And so that was a big question off the table. And then in terms of ROI, that was probably the easiest ROI I've ever had to sell. It was basically, if a customer was starting to get to a certain point with our milling center business, we knew that it was time for them to get a mill. And so in the beginning, it was a little bit tough because customers were initially thinking of us as just a milling center, and they were embarrassed they felt like a lack of loyalty if they said, hey, I'm going to get a mill. They don't want to tell us. And so when they started seeing that we were selling them, like when we were more out about the fact that we were selling this mill, and it was more obvious that, it's a good thing for you to take this in. We saw a big step change in that, but the return on investment was a no-brainer. I mean, if you're outsourcing at a certain level, and then you bring the machine in-house, it was the easiest way to make it into a no-brainer. And you didn't feel that leap of faith like am I going to get the zirconia business? Because back then it wasn't the most common thing to get zirconia business. And so you build up your business and then you transition when it's just a cost savings move for your lab.
That makes sense. Now, you're always willing to give that education away on what was the secret sauce. Why do you think it's hard to duplicate that today?
I think it's, I don't really know. I've been thinking about that a lot because, I remember the thing that really helped me understand the value of education was this one time I was doing a webinar about a product that costs about $30,000 for the lab, and I was doing a sales webinar, and I had only used the product for about 2 weeks. And in that webinar, half the attendees were actual customers of mine who already had the product. And I was nervous that I was like, well, I'm in sales mode and I'm not in education mode. Why are these people who have the product coming to the webinar? Yeah. And so I did the webinar, and then I got 3 phone calls after from the existing customers who said, I didn't know it could do that. When I did the demo, they were like, I didn't even know it could do that. And I have had this product for 2 years.
Wow.
And I was like, that's amazing. You spent all this money, and I figured out in 2 weeks something that you didn't know your product could even do, and you're running the lab every day. And it occurred to me, we need to create Cap Academy. And Cap Academy was the free education to teach people about the equipment that they already have, whether they bought it from us or not. The power of that was that if you give before you get, by giving that, we become a trusted advisor to the company, to the customer. And they say, those guys know what they're talking about. They end up calling us, right? And they just trust us. And then when you have that trust, they want to do business with you, ultimately. We don't do it just for that. We do want to help the industry, but there is a return on that investment. Yes. But it is a big investment. We had to stand up a new website. We had to create a ton of content. We would even answer phone calls from customers that didn't buy the equipment from us. We had a rule that you have to help customers that don't even buy the equipment from us. Eventually, we developed a reputation for trust and goodwill, and I think it worked out. Yeah. So,
but what if Cap were to be launched today in the crowded market that we have? What would you do differently, and what would you do the same?
What I always see with technologies is that there's a cutting edge. So like the stuff that was cutting edge back then is now
standard.
It's a standard, right? It's much more turnkey today. Like the solutions that are sold on the market, people know the recipes, right? They're actually being sold as a recipe already.
Yeah.
But there's always a cutting edge of what is the next frontier. With technology, there's a lot of things going on with AI. There's a lot of stuff going on with new indications that are moving into the digital world. So I think it's the underlying sentiment of having what we had an R&D team who figured out what those solutions are. We had a manufacturing center that actually used those solutions. That's a critical leg of the stool, that you actually use the solutions that you're selling, because then you can understand what the limitations or what the issues are. And then we always graduated the people who worked in that center into the support center, because then when they answered the phone, the customer was always talking to someone who did 10,000 cases of the same thing and saw every problem you're ever going to see. And that is the magic, right? Is that you have a curated solution that's well tested, that your own team is using, and that your own team can support. That's really what we did.
Amazing.
And it's a lot of work. And we had a 30-person support team. It was not cheap, but
wow.
But it was. I would say there were also the ones that that whole system. The whole system is what made Cap. If you took one piece out of it, it wouldn't be Cap.
It won't work. That makes sense. So you continue to find ways to give back to the dental industry. Tell me, what are you doing today?
I am my experience at CAP in growing the business. By the way, I haven't said enough about Bob Cohen, my partner. He was a huge part of this whole thing, and understanding the lab need, right, and that R&D side of things. He was a huge part of that. But in the process of growing the business, we had seen that it was hard to keep track of our customers. Who's coming, who's going, which customers are buying mills but not zirconia, or zirconia but not tools. And so there was all this data that was in our world that was like a gold mine of information, but we just couldn't we couldn't like elevate it to what are the insights about this that we can take action on, until we started building systems around it. And so I was building systems to help us do that, but it was hard. And so now I've
back
started.
then, I think we had Tableau.
Yes, exactly. Tableau,
yeah, was available for reporting.
Exactly, and so we were using Tableau, but it was a lot of work, and you need a degree in.
I mean, even Bob was out there. I remember he had a video series about what's going on, wasn't it?
What's going on? Yes, exactly.
Everybody was doing their part.
Yes, and so so through that experience, I was like, I have this problem, and then I realized that any distributor has this problem, and that actually manufacturers have this problem, and especially dental labs have this problem. They have dentists that are sending them work and disappearing. There are dentists sending work and maybe just fixed but not removable or implants. So I built a solution that mines the information in their lab management system and helps them see which customers might be at risk of disappearing, which customers could be buying in other categories, so that you can, the best way to grow a business is to keep them, keep customers, and do more business with them. Yes. And so that's what we're helping the lab industry do now.
So it's integrated into the lab management systems and is able to pull that data in a more dashboard kind of way that you can see the customers and their behavior.
Yeah, and it takes it to the next step, which is, the thing about BI tools is that they will just show you a report and it updates, which is really nice, but doesn't really help you interpret what's happening, and it doesn't tell you what to do. So if you're a sales rep or a customer service rep or customer success rep, you're probably really good at talking to people, but you didn't go to school to study data and analytics, right? You want to just do what you do best. So we basically help the rep just quickly understand who should I talk to and what should I talk to them about today. And so it was my dream at CAP to have that, and so we're able to do that for the dental lab industry.
How exciting, and exciting for the dental industry, and excited for you that continue to push dentistry forward. It's people like you that really make things happen ultimately for the patient. I remember when I used to work with implants, and I used to see foot-mouth, reconstruction, and seeing the before and after picture of the patients and how it changed their lives, that really gave me purpose. And so seeing what you continue to do also gives me purpose, because it's who we are, and we do it for the industry, and we do it for the patients, because we are also patients.
That's right. That's right.
Now as a hip hop fan, I sometimes like to quote artists that make some profound statements. And Jay-Z once asked, how many billionaires can come from me? And he listed Kanye and he listed Rihanna. Now, under that sentiment, Rob, of the super team you had at CAP, I know of quite a few superstars that are now recognized as leading professionals in their digital space. And they're doing amazing things. And they continue to be respected resources for educating, Roland DGA's DigiShape solutions. And to me, that's a true statement of the leadership you and your partners had, and that helped so many dental professionals flourish. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much. There's nothing more special to me than that outcome there. And I also want to thank you and Roland. It was a huge part of our success, as a wonderful partner for us.
And you're part of our history too.
Absolutely.
Thank you for stopping by today.
Thank you.